I'm a floating head. Woo! Hello everybody, welcome to another episode. It's your old pal Dave and Larry here. We're going into legendary gears real quick as we talk about the most unusual sightings such as the Mothman and the Yeti.
The hell's the Mothman?
It's this creature often described as a tall humanoid figure with glowing red eyes and large wings. Witnesses say it can actually fly without flapping its wings, often chasing cars at high speed.
That sounds like some made-up
How do you know? You think science knows everything?
Well, yes, that's why we got him.
You're such a dumbass.
How am I a dumbass?
We don't have the answers to everything, man, and that's the problem with science.
But this is why they investigate, to provide some of the answers. Don't you see, boy? I mean, they technically aren't giving a yes or a no. They're theorizing.
They're fun to listen to. I mean, nobody's ever proven this story to be BS.
Let's hear it.
People who've often seen the Mothman often describe the creature as 7 feet tall with its wings stretched of 10 feet wide. It soars through the sky within incredible speeds, often reaching about 100 miles per hour. What haunts those who actually encounter it are its burning, glowing red eyes. Beyond these eerie details, the creature remains a mystery. Its true form, its habits, and the reason why it appeared in West Virginia are still unknown. 5 gravediggers were working near Clendenin, West Virginia, when something strange had happened. One of them noticed movement within the trees. As they turned to look, they noticed a creature rise up in the air very fast, spanning its wings and flying up over their heads. Since the creature disappeared within the night, they dismissed it as their imagination or just a large bird. But just 3 days later, in the nearby town of Point Pleasant, things escalated very quickly. 4 young couples by the name of Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Millette, were out for a late-night drive near an old World War II's munitions plant, also known as the TNT area. It was an abandoned site with decaying buildings, dark tunnels, and overgrown woods, a place that teenagers would often go to hang out. As they were driving, they noticed right across the road that there was a tall humanoid figure about 6 or 7 feet tall with glowing red eyes. But before they could react, the creature unfurled its wings and shot straight up in the air. Panicked, Roger stepped on the gas, speeding toward Point Pleasant, but as they glanced up in the air, they noticed something more horrifying. The creature was following them. It wasn't flapping its wings like a bird. Instead, it just glided effortlessly through the air, keeping pace with the car even if Roger was going 100 miles per hour. As the figure was gliding over the car, the couples even noticed that the wings were hitting the roof of their car. As the car approached to the outskirts of Point Pleasant, the creature then veered off to the side of the road and disappeared. The couples rushed to the police station to report their encounter. At first, the officers thought the story was all BS, but in noticing the body language within these couples that were shaken, they noticed that they needed to investigate this. But that same night, Sheriff Johnson and his deputies drove into the TNT area. They saw nothing unusual, but when they grabbed their flashlights into the trees, they noticed some strange noises. Something rustling into the darkness, something that was bigger than any animal they had encountered. The following day, the couples returned to the TNT area and hoping to make sense of what they had just seen. On the ground, they noticed 2 horseshoe-like footprints fused together. Adding to the mystery, Linda Scarberry noted that she wished that somebody else had seen the footprints besides her. After their encounter, there were more locals within the area that had also stepped forward with their own stories regarding the Mothman. There were even reports of UFOs filling the skies and also reports of the Men in Black. And this was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, dozens of sightings were reported. A local contractor by the name of Newell Partridge claimed that the Mothman was just outside of his house. He saw its glowing red eyes within the dark and started hearing these strange screeching noises. His German Shepherd Bandit ran into the woods, barking at something that was unseen, only to never to return again. Another woman by the name of Marcella Bennett was visiting friends near the TNT area where she saw the creature. As she got out of her car, a dark figure rose from the ground. It was the Mothman. She was so terrified that she collapsed with her baby in her hands towards the ground. When her friends came and grabbed her, they rushed her inside as the Mothman stood there. People described hearing eerie-like noises like scratches and screeching on their television sets. Some people even claimed to have nightmares about the Mothman before they saw it. As the reports increased, so did fear. Some thought it was a mutated bird left behind in the TNT area, while others believed it was a supernatural being. And then something tragic happened. The Silver Bridge collapse that happened on December 15th of 1967. The Silver Bridge, a vital connection that spans over the Ohio River, was packed with rush hour traffic as locals hurried home. At approximately 5:04 p.m. is when the disaster struck. Eyewitnesses reported hearing creaking and groaning under the 37 vehicles that were jammed on top of this bridge. Some of the drivers later recalled an unsettling vibration that was underneath them. Then all of a sudden, with a nearby chain reaction, the eye bar that was sitting near on top of the bridge had finally collapsed, sending tons of steel and concrete to be plunged into the freezing Ohio River. For those that were trapped on the bridge, there was little time to react. In an instant, cars and trucks were plunged into the river as well, with some people crushing under the concrete, while others being trapped in their cars sinking. And eyewitnesses to the report just remember hearing a loud explosion and cars plunging into the air and into the river and people screaming, trying to get out and grasping for air, because the water was freezing at 44 degrees Fahrenheit, 7 degrees Celsius. And the strong current that was underneath the water was allowing the vehicles to be pulled from under, and unfortunately people had perished. Onlookers rushed for help, but the sheer of destruction was just overwhelming. Oddly though, before the bridge had collapsed, there were officials that claimed to have seen the Mothman lurking near the bridge. Some believe it was a warning of impending disaster, while others believed it was just a coincidence. But what do you think Mothman was doing in days before the bridge had collapsed? Was he trying to warn officials and believing that there was an impending doom that would happen within the city across the Ohio River?
Well, that's one hell of a story, boy.
I know, right? My favorite part are the drawings. They give you chills up your spine. And look at those red eyes. They just glow in the dark, man.
Well, I think those eyes are slowly exaggerated. I don't think they glow that bright.
But they probably look like cat's eyes at night. You know when you shine a flashlight on their eyes, they give you that bike reflector look?
You got any more stories like this?
Let me think.
Well, what you got?
The Yeti.
You talking about the microphone?
No! Many people reported a creature about 6 to 10 feet tall, towering over a human, with broad shoulders and a muscular ape-like body, often compared to a gorilla, covered in thick gray, white, reddish-brown hair, good for cold climates. Some say it has a flat human-like face, with a broad nose, while others say it's ape-like, with eyes deep glowing or reflective at night, large footprints 18 to 12 inches long with 5 toes. Now, what witnesses saw this? Well, there is one story. This one story will kind of give you chills. It was the year 1832, and there was a young man by the name of Brian Hodgson, a British explorer, who led his team to the mountains of northern Nepal. They were studying the plants and animals of the land, and the journey had been very long, and the mountains stood tall and silent around them. His Sherpa guides, who knew this land very well, walked carefully along the narrow path. A thick fog had covered the forest, which made everything hard to see. Now, Hodgson was used to seeing strange creatures, but this was one that was totally out of his league. When the bushes unexpectedly shook, the Sherpas, usually calm, looked afraid. One of them pointed at the trees, speaking quickly in Nepalese. Hodgson had squinted in the fog, trying to see what had scared them, when all of a sudden a shape moved, and it was a tall, hairy figure that stood in between the trees. It was covered in dark fur, but within the fog it was hard to see in detail. Hodgson could tell it was standing on 2 legs like a man. Its arms were long and its shoulders were broad, and for a few seconds the creature just stood there, just watching them. Then in an instant it turned and ran faster than anything. The sound of branches breaking filled the air, and in the moments the creature was gone. The Sherpas, clearly shaking, had whispered among themselves. One turned to Hodgson and spoke in a hushed voice. "Raksha Banda," they said, "the wild man of the mountains." And Hodgson was a man of science. He was really trying to make sense of what had happened. He thought it had been a large monkey or an ape, but the Sherpas didn't believe that, as they said that monkeys don't walk like men, and this one did. That night, the guides refused to stay in the area. They made Hodgson and others move further down the path, though he wasn't sure what others had seen. After this, Hodgson wrote down the event in his journal, making this the first ever recorded experience of the Yeti. And this story would later inspire other explorers to look for this creature. But at that moment, in the misty Himalayan forest, one thing was clear. Something strange had lived in these mountains, and it was watching them. The cold mountain wind had howled through the valley, as N.A. Tambazi, with the British Geographical Royal Society, made his way up the Zimu Glacier in Sikkim, India. His team had been climbing for hours, with the snow crunching over their boots as they had gained altitude. The peaks of the Himalayas stood above them, with the thin air and biting against their skin. Now, Tambazi was used to the challenges of these expeditions, but on this particular day it just felt different. The silence was too deep, like as if the mountains had been holding their breath. The Sherpas, who had grown up in this land, walked carefully, looking around and darting around in the exception of expecting to see something. Tambazi took out his camera, adjusting his lens to capture the icy landscape, and that's when one of the Sherpas grasped and pointed. Tambazi then turned around to a ridge that was about 300 yards away. At first he thought it was just a shadow that was in the snow, but then it started to move. A dark figure that was standing on two legs ended up walking along the ridge. It was taller than any other man that Tambazi had seen, with its long arms swinging as it moved. And it walked with a strange heavy gait, like as if it wasn't used to walking upright for long. And the creature was covered in dark hair, disappearing in its rocky surroundings. After seeing this, Tambazi froze, with his heart pounding against his chest. And he had heard people that were in the area of the mountains talk about this creature before, but he never believed it until he saw it. But before the creature was fully able to disappear within the Rocky Mountains, the creature then paused and turned its head around slightly, sensing the people watching it. And for the moment, time seemed to stand very still. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the creature then vanished behind the ridge, thus disappearing into top speed. The sound of loose rocks had tumbled down the air. During this exact moment, the Sherpas were in fear of their lives, giving the creature respect, as they were mumbling in their whispered voices what they had just seen. Tambazi then felt his hands trembled as he was lowering the camera, too shocked to take a picture of what he just saw. Determined to find out more, he led his team towards the spot where the creature had stood. When they reached to the area, they found a trail of massive footprints that were in the snow. The prints were larger than any other human foot, with its toes pressed deep into the snow, suggesting that whatever made them was heavy and tall. When figuring out what this creature was, the Sherpas had whispered in their own language it was the Mete, which is an old ancient name for the Yeti that they used.
Are there any evidence of this?
Well, there sure is. In 1951, a British expedition had set out to explore a new path up Mount Everest. Their goal was to see if the southwestern side of the mountain could provide an easier route for climbers to reach the top in the future. The team was led by Eric Shipton, a skilled and experienced mountaineer. Alongside him were Bill Murray, Tom Burdillon, and W.H. Ward. These were all British climbers. Since the journey required carrying a lot of equipment and supplies, a group of Sherpa porters traveled with them. These Sherpas were experienced in navigating the icy terrain of the Himalayas. Their leader was Angtar K, a Sherpa who had climbed with Shipton on previous expeditions and was considered a close and trusted friend with Shipton. An officer from the Geological Survey of India who joined to study the landscape. As the expedition was already underway, another well-known Sherpa by the name of Norgay Tenzing, whom the team also called Sen Tenzing, joined them. Tenzing had assisted climbers on many previous expeditions and was also a friend of Shipton's. The team began their journey on August 27th of 1951, making their way through the treacherous and icy slopes of the Himalayas. But then a couple months later, there's a mysterious discovery within the snow. On November 8th of 1951, Shipton, Ward, and Tenzing were making their way down a glacier in the Menlung Basin after crossing a high mountain pass. The wind howled around them with the snow beneath their boots crunching with each step. The team had been trekking for hours when suddenly something caught their attention. A trail of large footprints stretching across the fresh snow. The footprints were massive, far larger than a human foot, spread out in a clear path. The three climbers stopped in their tracks, staring at them in disbelief. Without hesitation, Tenzing immediately identified the tracks as belonging to a Yeti. He had heard many stories about the mysterious wild man, but had seen the tracks of this creature before. But these tracks were different. They looked very fresh, something that was made within the last 24 hours. Some of the prints were still sharp and untouched, and had not been distorted by the sun's warmth or melting snow. Realizing the importance of this discovery, Sharpton then took out his camera and took a picture at one of the most detailed footprints as possible. And these pictures later became one of the most fascinating evidences of the existence of the Yeti, leaving scientists and the public and climbers to question on what type of creature roamed the highest point of the mountains. And wider than the boots of the expedition team, the prints stood out against the icy terrain. But Shipton noted an unusual arrangement with the toes. Not long after, the rest of the team had caught it up with the rest of the tracks. Mountaineer Tom Burdillon later wrote to a friend describing how the prints seemed to originate from a secondary pass at 19,500 feet before descending down the glacier. As they followed the trail from a nearby mile, the climbers came across a gap in the ice where the unknown creature had leapt across a crevice where it had dug in for balance. Eventually, however, the expedition had to shift, focus back to their primary mission, leaving the mysterious tracks behind. But news of the strange discovery spread very quickly. In 1952, Shipton published a book called The Mount Everest Expedition of 1951, which included details of the prints and the legends of the Yeti that was discovered among the Himalayan people. He also wrote an article specifically about the footprints, sparking widespread curiosity and debate. Shipton never declared outright where he believed the footprints had come from, but he was quick to dismiss the skeptics who suggested that they belonged to a bear or a languid monkey. The Natural Museum History in London even attempted to recreate the tracks using a Himalayan bear walking on the sand, but the results didn't match. As for the langurs, Shipton pointed out that even the largest species had footprints no more than 8 inches long, and such primates couldn't even survive at such extreme altitudes, as they relied on plant-based food sources. Adding to the mystery was a testimony of Sen Tenzing, a Sherpa who had seen the Yeti himself at just 25 yards away. He described the creature at 5 feet 6 inches tall, standing upright, covered in reddish-brown hair, with a hairless face and a pointed head. The Sherpas were deeply familiar with local wildlife. If Tenzing had seen something unusual at such close range, it seemed unlikely that he was mistaking it with something that was familiar. So Larry, what would you do if you saw this damn thing staring at you?
Well, what would I do? I'd probably throw something at it and run.
Well, what if it's chasing you?
Well, I'd have to get drunk to find that out.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and to keep in mind that truth is stranger than fiction. And maybe you too might find the Mothman and Yeti, perhaps having a cup of tea and discussing their next encounter.
That's some corny-ass outro, but I'll go along with it.